Hello, I'm Cinemod470, and your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is too friendly. Originally, the series was titled Freshman Year to be a prequel to the Civil War movie, but the creative team found it too limiting and restrictive. They instead made the series an alternative MCU timeline, where Peter would instead be mentored by Norman Osborn and not join the Avengers. For this analysis, I'll not only be reviewing the first season, but also be comparing the writing, narrative, and characters to other Spider-Man shows and superhero media, especially those I have previously talked about, and if Friendly Neighborhood emulates the spirit of Spider-Man.
So you do have superpowers. We could be a team. We gonna get fame, money.
Don't forget the bitches.
There's not gonna be fame and there's not gonna be bitches. Okay, I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to be like everybody else.
That isn't what your parents wanted for you.
You're not my father.
But I love you like your father did. I believe in you like your father did. I had sex with your mother just like your father did.
Though the series diverted from the original concept of being a prequel to Civil War, it didn't deviate enough from the MCU, since the show focuses less about creating its own continuity and being more of a long version of What If. Especially since the first episode's story beats match Peter's introduction in Civil War and references the Sokovia Accords and other past MCU events. The only deviations are the school Peter goes to, and that instead of Stark seeking him out, it's Osborn. But the series isn't just tied to the MCU, it is overly dependent on it to the point that Peter's origin is tied to a Doctor Strange cameo. Now, I like Doctor Strange, but by having Spider-Man's origin tied to a Doctor Strange fight lessens the character's agency, since it draws focus away from Peter and it makes both the universe and one of Marvel's most popular characters feel small. And what was wrong with the original origin about a random spider who just happened to get in the way of an experiment and bite Peter after being irradiated? If there was a mandate that the origin had to be tied to the MCU, why not do what Ultimate Spider-Man did and have the gene splice spider be an attempt to recreate the super soldier serum? Though the old Netflix shows were set in the MCU, they knew not to be reliant on it, and keep enough degree of separation so the characters could stand on their own. Imagine if Matt Murdock went blind not because he saved an old man from being run over by a truck, but because Iron Man got in a fight on that street and Matt was just collateral damage. Or Jessica Jones was put into a coma not because it was a random car accident, but because Cap and Bucky were having their epic street fight at the time. Or the reason Luke Cage got sent to prison wasn't because he was framed for murder, but because the authorities thought he was Sam Wilson. It diminishes their stories because the main characters wouldn't have individuality. In the 90s cartoon, though there were cameos from other Marvel characters, they were used only when it made sense in the narrative. Spider-Man has a magic problem, so Doctor Strange gets involved. Spider-Man has a mutation problem, so he visits the X-Men. Or Peter Parker has a legal problem, so Matt Murdock gets hired as his attorney. Also, by being so closely tied to the MCU, the series is tied to the franchise's continuity and baggage. If this version of Doctor Strange is a variant of the MCU Strange, why doesn't he take the fight with Venom to the mirror dimension, or use astral projection to secretly sabotage Norman's wormhole project? That's how the sorcerers have stayed off the radar till Infinity War, and I guarantee that the populace will be well aware that magic exists because of Strange's time paradox blunder. Don't worry, I'll get into that later. If the Sokovia Accords are happening concurrently with the series, how would Norman be able to keep a team from his company that develops superhero suits and tech for Spider-Man secret? And even though he does tell Ross, Spider-Man's been active and started working with Norman well before he got approval from the United Nations. So there's probably going to be several legal consequences Norman will have to deal with. Also, if Ross does any kind of background check or even an interview, he'll probably work out this random security guy isn't the real Spider-Man. Hell, they don't even have the same body type. Since the season's only 10 episodes long, the series needs to be aware of how it uses its time. Like, did we really need the first episode to feature a Doctor Strange fight just so we had an explanation on where the spider came from? And spoiler alert for the end of Season 1, turns out Spider-Man's origin is a time paradox, because the spider that bit Peter was from the future when Norman used Spider-Man's blood to replicate his powers. The origin may be unique, but it's needlessly complicated. The reason Peter gets his abilities while witnessing a science experiment wasn't just to explain where his powers came from. It's to build his character by showcasing his love of science and how he's singled out because of it. Let's use Sam Raimi's Spider-Man origin for comparison. Within the first 10 minutes of the movie, before the spider bites Peter, the spectators are introduced to all the major characters and have a decent understanding of their personalities and dynamics. Peter is the unpopular nerd who has a crush on MJ. Though MJ is popular and doesn't always notice Peter, she doesn't like it when he gets bullied. Harry and his father Norman don't have the best relationship. And Norman gains an interest in Peter due to his innate intelligence that Harry lacks. And from this earliest scene on the bus, we can surmise that Harry is Peter's best friend because he's nothing but kind to Peter. In Friendly Neighbourhood, before Peter gets his powers, the only characters we're introduced to are Peter, May, and Nico. Though we get an understanding of Peter and May's history, Peter and Nico only just met. And because the writers want to make the simplest origin story needlessly complicated, we can't flesh out the other important character dynamics. When Osborn wants to help Peter in his heroics, he creates multiple suit variants that have none of Spider-Man's iconography or utilize any of his natural abilities. The true purpose of the costumes is to reference the Identity Crisis crossover from 1998. Basically, Spider-Man was wanted for murder and had a $5 million bounty on his head, so he couldn't make any public appearances. But to continue helping the city, Peter created 4 new superhero identities with their own unique designs and used different portions of his powers. Peter would eventually throw away the old costumes, and they would be adopted by 4 random people, and they would dub themselves the Slingers. Their book was cancelled after 12 issues. In the show, though the purpose of the suits is to illustrate that though Norman wants to help, he automatically assumes he knows what's best and gives Peter the suits, not realizing they're more of a hindrance, until he finally gives Peter a spider-themed suit. That plotline took up an entire episode, and it was a complete waste of the season's finite time. Time they could have instead used to develop Peter and Norman's relationship while they were working on the suit together, or use the time to further set up Scorpion and Doc Ock as these powerful threats that the characters say they are. But I'll get into that later. Hell, the writers could have just used throwaway lines to save time on why these suit designs were a bad idea. Hey Peter, here's your new costume, you'll like it, it has a cape. Yeah, nah Normie, when was the last time you saw someone successfully backflip with a cape? Okay, how about a black wingsuit? Why don't we put the wings in the maybe pile? But I look like the culmination of children's nightmares. I mean, Christ, Normie, the Babadook looked less scary. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Thank you. A Wasp-style jetpack with wrist rockets. In what reality is giving a teenager lethal weaponry a good idea? Even if the Slingers make an appearance next season, all these scenes will still be a waste of time. This sort of fluff looks like it comes from a filler episode in a 26-episode season because the writers needed to fill a quota, not a 10-episode series. I think the reason for this is because they were already renewed for another season, so they thought they had episodes to burn. But making your audience feel like they're wasting their time or have to wait till season 2 for the story to get good isn't sustainable when writing for television. The guys writing Spectacular Spider-Man planned for 5 seasons and multiple TV movies. But out of the 2 seasons that did get to air, they didn't waste a minute and managed to get incredible mileage for both the story and characters. And 90% of the plot points and characters that were set up in the first season were paid off in that season, and the only other 10% came up in the last episode. Whereas in Friendly Neighbourhood, if you want to know what's up with Daredevil, Finesse, Rhino, and Chameleon, you'll have to wait till next season. Finally, I want to talk about the tonal inconsistency, or as I like to call it, typical MCU shenanigans, because the series can't decide between being a kid's cartoon or a mature animation. 2/3 of the season is slapstick humor and exaggerated teen drama, to be followed by a commentary of social inequality, moral ambiguity, and Spidey getting stabbed. This last third is actually pretty good, since we get a sense of the prejudice Lonnie deals with outside of school through visual storytelling and no dialogue, and Spider-Man has to deal with the dilemma of arresting a thief who just lost her job and needed the money. But because of the amount of useless crap these writers call comedy, like a bunch of teens making bird noises, Norman making redundant suits that threaten people and cause collateral damage, and a bunch of guys live streaming their crimes for some reason, we don't get to fully explore the more serious themes that actually make the series interesting. Another example is the scene when Peter gets stabbed. It is genuinely shocking, but not because we're afraid for our hero's safety, because it doesn't really fit the established tone of the series since the first 6 episodes were dealing with the aforementioned useless crap. The series can't even take gang violence seriously. In the 2 instances where the rival gangs meet up for a fight, both sides just have knives, pipes, and fists, and not think to come strapped. We'll show people getting stabbed, but getting shot is apparently out of the question. I'm not saying you can't have a good balance of humor and maturity, but the key word is balance. The first Iron Man movie had a lot of humorous and mature moments, but the humor came from the character's natural wit, not some sitcom joke mandate. And they didn't make jokes when the situation was dire, so the immersion wasn't broken. Even Spider-Man the New Animated Series, which has a mature tone throughout, balanced it with well-written banter and character drama. Let's use X-Men 97 for a final overall comparison. The series is a continuation of a previously established continuity that showcases mature themes about social injustice and discrimination, while also making time for humorous moments and featuring cameos from other Marvel properties. But why X-Men 97 worked was because it understood the subject matter of the X-Men titles, that they involved some pretty heavy themes, and made sure they were front and center. And though there are light-hearted moments, they don't clash with the mature tone because that's how the characters naturally act when they're not being attacked by giant robots. Also, the series would use the cameos sparingly and only when it made sense to the narrative, like after Magneto causes a worldwide EMP, and Bastion started his Sentinel attack. We see characters in their respective environments to visualize how widespread these attacks are, and the carnage caused by them. The only cameo that actually gets involved with the X-Men is Captain America, but that's after the attack on Genosha, and he's conducting his own investigation. However, his involvement is restricted because he still has to follow the chain of command. Not only does Captain America's involvement fit the narrative, he doesn't steal the limelight from the X-Men. Though the animation and character designs have a visual appeal and does match the original comic art style, the 3D render doesn't always work. There are some instances where the characters are talking and select body parts are completely still. It just makes them appear unnatural. Even though Tenas's animation style is pretty dated, the animators knew they had to keep the character models moving to make them look like real people. And during several fights, the frame rate drops, which removes a lot of the energy and fluidity. The camera angles also struggle to emulate depth, like when Lonnie is running across the field for the touchdown, but the shot makes him look like he's running 10 feet. Also, the way some scenes are blocked make it look like the characters have no depth perception, like when the Firefly ripoff doesn't see Spider-Man hanging from the ceiling, even though the ceiling doesn't look that high and Spider-Man shot a web line in the ripoff's field of view. Or when Scorpion managed to appear unnoticed with his entire gang on the street. And when Peter accidentally reveals his secret identity to Harry because he somehow didn't see him sitting right next to Norman. Hell, Peter could have just seen him through the bloody window. Yeah, these scenes needed better planning, not only where the characters were positioned, but the layout of the sets.
It's like my Uncle Kagi once said, with great power comes great big booty bitches.
That is not what he said.
He totally said it.
He did not say that.
Totally did.
Why am I friends with you?
The writers don't understand Spider-Man on a fundamental level. Unlike the Homecoming movies, which kept Uncle Ben's existence as this Schrodinger's cat situation, the first episode confirms that Peter had an Uncle Ben, but he died before Peter got his powers, which completely removes the with great power comes great responsibility lesson that makes Spider-Man who he is. When making any adaptation, there are these hinge points we high society cinephiles call cardinal functions. A cardinal function is an aspect of a character or story that needs to be included, otherwise it's not the same character or story. Batman has to watch his parents get shot in an alley as a child because it dictates the kind of hero he becomes. Superman has to arrive on Earth as a baby to a pair of decent parents because it dictates the kind of hero he becomes. And Spider-Man has to use his powers selfishly and have caused the death of his uncle because it dictates the kind of hero he becomes. Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man just helps people because he can, not because he took a vow to never look the other way. I don't know why Marvel Studios wants to push this sanitized version of Spider-Man, but it makes him uninteresting. Iron Man, Thor, Doctor Strange, and Star-Lord all start off selfish and arrogant, and after receiving the consequences of their actions, they become the heroes everyone loves. It's as the saying goes, great trees can't grow without first being planted in dirt.
Who said this?
Me. Just now.
Going back to the robber scene, Spider-Man returns the money and asks the pizza man to not press charges because she made a mistake and promises to be better. Imagine how harder this scene would hit with the great power, great responsibility origin. It would explain why Peter empathizes with this woman because he himself made a mistake but is trying to make up for it. On the Peter Parker side, the writers confuse Peter being a nerd for being a dork. Mind you, there is a difference between a dork and a nerd. A nerd is someone who's extremely enthusiastic and knowledgeable about a subject. A dork is someone who's socially inept. And Friendly Neighborhood Peter is too much of a dork.
You know what your problem is? You've got a lazy tongue. If you don't learn to speak up and speak your mind, you will never be heard over all the other voices in the room that are much, much louder.
In Tenace and Spectacular Spider-Man, there were moments where Peter acted like a dork, but those moments didn't dominate his personality. He had more dimension and was interesting to watch. And when those versions did act dorky, it was to cover up that he was Spider-Man, and Peter wasn't cringe every time he opened his mouth. And I don't mean the kind of cringe that's well written because it reflects real life and adds character development. I mean the kind of cringe where I have to pause the episode for 5 minutes to buttress my psyche, and pause for another 5 minutes after watching the scene so my soul can return to my body.
I just, really like fire. Love watching it, burn. Deuces.
Parker out.
In both the original and Ultimate Comics, Peter was singled out and bullied because he was stuck in a school where none of his classmates shared his interest in science. And Pete didn't just take the relentless torment in stride, he became hateful and bitter towards his bullies. And those negative feelings mixed with spider powers gave Peter a sense of entitlement that the world owed him for his hardship, and it came back to bite him. Even if you argue that Peter was a dork before he had powers, he became confident after getting them, because after becoming strong for the first time in his life, Peter assumes he can do anything. For the last 13 years, Disney has had this belief that Spider-Man's popularity comes from him being a dork, and that's what made him relatable to readers. But the truth is, Peter, even from his first incarnation, was a fully formed and unique character, and what made him relatable were the situations he was put in. Specifically, how he reacted when he got his powers after being bullied for his intelligence most of his life. And even after he becomes a hero, it doesn't solve all his problems. He still gets called a menace for wearing a mask even after saving the day, and he has to pay bills. In fact, Peter's early irresponsible attitude juxtaposed against Spider-Man's villains gave his character more intrigue, since Peter understands the temptation to being irresponsible with his power, and his villains all make the same mistake he did, showcasing that Peter could have become a villain. Now, imagine that kind of juxtaposition with Lonnie and Octavius. How Lonnie is discarding his responsibilities, and Octavius is abusing his intelligence because he feels the world owes him. And speaking of villains, aside from Speed Demon and Scorpion, Spidey should be able to defeat the series' rogues with ease. Especially if this version of Spider-Man is just the MCU version on a different direction. Holland Peter was able to take on both Bucky and Falcon and had the same level of experience as Friendly Peter. And before you say Iron Man gave Peter a new suit to enhance him, Spider-Man didn't use any of the suit's enhancements or gadgets during those fights, only his natural superpowers and standard web shooters, and his spider sense, which is for some reason absent in the series. The only thing the suit enhanced was his aesthetic. Yet in most of Spidey's fights, he needs some kind of outside interference to beat them, which really diminishes Spider-Man's capabilities. And some of these villains could be taken down by the police, just because of how exposed they are. Sure, Tarantula has lightsaber gloves, and Unicorn has a laser helmet, but the rest of their bodies are exposed to these things called guns. You know, the things gangsters should have. And if their gear could deflect bullets, let the spectators see them deflect bullets. In previous Spider-Man shows, at least the good ones, the creators made sure to showcase how much of a threat each villain is. So much so that Spider-Man couldn't always beat them with his super strength alone. But when he can't physically beat them, he'll outsmart them, or throw a couple of quips so he's underestimated. I'm not saying Spider-Man should dominate in every fight, but it's compelling to watch a hero persevere and overcome a challenge.
You are freaking African Americans, plus Mark.
Friendly Neighbourhood completely neglects a majority of Spider-Man's original cast for extra Universal characters. The showrunner Jeff Tramiel stated that he was a fan of characters like Nico and Pearl and wanted to expand their fan bases and get people to read their comics, which is well intended, but it upsets me that Spider-Man's original supporting cast are being given the shaft because the people in charge find them uninteresting, overused, or need superpowers to stay relevant. Because one of the reasons the comics were so appealing was due to the writer's effort in giving each supporting character the same level of dimension as Peter. Flash started out as a bully, but after seeing Spider-Man save people, he wants to do something just as important, so Flash joins the service. Mary Jane was the victim of an abusive father, which affected her attitude towards relationships. And in order to hide her trauma, MJ would constantly go to parties and have this free spirit persona. But after Gwen's death, MJ sees how distraught Peter is and drops the persona to be a better friend. Here's a real deep cut if you're not convinced. Frederick Foswell was a reporter for the Daily Bugle and was secretly the crime boss known as the Big Man. After Spider-Man sent him to prison, Foswell had seemingly reformed and got his old job back. He would even help the police arrest the villain Crime Master, but Foswell secretly still wanted to take over the criminal underworld, so he became Kingpin's lieutenant. But when Jameson's life was in danger, Foswell took a bullet and died saving him. Nico Minoru is an interesting Runaways character, but being tied to Peter's cast, much like Doctor Strange being tied to Spider-Man's origin, actually downplays her character. Now, I don't know how she's going to be handled in future seasons, since her original story was that she and her friend's parents were all supervillains, so they had to run away and foil their plots.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
And with Nico living in a foster family, her mother being some spirit possessing her necklace, and being a part of Peter's story, I can't say this is an accurate depiction, especially since the showrunner stated his intent was to get more people to learn about her character.
Like all characters that I really love in comics, and would hope that like people come to the show, meet these new characters, then follow them to the comics and go check out Runaways or Avengers Academy or things of that nature.
Nico also feels too dependent on Peter, because most of her screen time is her being upset with him because he misses out on social events when he has to be Spider-Man, that he's making friends with Harry and she for some reason can't hang out with other people, and threatens to end their friendship for not telling her he's Spider-Man, which is really hypocritical since she's been keeping her magic spirit mum necklace secret. In Spectacular, Gwen did get upset with Peter for being caught up with Spider-Man, but those moments were when he would disappear while there was a life or death crisis. And there was more to her personality than just being friends with Peter. Gwen managed to match Peter's intelligence, which was crucial when helping to cure the lizard and discovering Harry's addiction. And she had relationships with the rest of the supporting cast. Pearl suffers the same problems, only with Lonnie instead of Peter. We don't see Pearl interact with anyone other than Lonnie, Peter, and Nico, so we can develop her personality in a way that gives her a sense of individuality. And most of her screen time is Peter having a crush on her, dating Lonnie, and having an invested interest in what he's doing. Now, being invested in your partner isn't bad, and Pearl's concern for Lonnie does move his plot forward. But if the value of a character is being a side character's girlfriend, or the main character's crush, then are they really a character? Love interests like Liz and Indy weren't just Peter's girlfriends. Liz was insecure about how poorly she was doing in school, and she covered up those negative feelings by hanging with the popular crowd and acting like them, even though it was hurting her future. And Indy had goals of becoming a genuine news reporter, and though both their character arcs put them in the same orbit as Peter, they weren't dependent on him. Lonnie is the most interesting of the supporting cast because he has a character arc, and we actually witness his journey. How Lonnie started out in high school attempting to grab every possible advantage, but he ends up stuck in a gang to get his younger brother out. And as he spends more time with them, his reluctance changes to devotion as he witnesses the loyalty within the gang. I'm actually very curious about where they're going to take his character and if he's going to become more like the Tombstone we know. And on that cheerful note, let's get controversial. In terms of race or gender swapping characters, I don't usually care so long as the character maintains their cardinal functions. So if an iteration of Jim Gordon or Catwoman isn't white, I'm indifferent towards it as long as they have the same characteristics as their comic book counterparts. If a character's skin tone and nationality make up an important part of their personality, then yes, it has to remain. And if a writer is going to drastically change a character, they better make up for it with a well-rounded and entertaining personality. Also, there have been several instances of comic characters being race-swapped throughout the decades. Even Spectacular would race-swap the more obscure members of the supporting cast, but they would still be interesting. All that being said, this version of Harry Osborn is pretty bland in comparison to his previous versions. Don't get me wrong, the actor and writers do a decent job portraying a young man who was born rich but feels isolated because he can't easily make friends with regular people or connect with his father. But he doesn't have the same level of complexity from Spectacular or personality from Tenace.
I just thought you might like a latte with steamed Austrian goat milk.
What do I look like, an imbecile? Of course I want a latte. I love the way you make them!
The season has 3 major villains, Octavius, Gargan, and Norman. Out of the 3, Norman is definitely the best because we see so many sides to him. And Coleman Domingo's performance keeps the spectators on their toes because we never know if what he's saying is genuine or not. And by the end of the season, we see how manipulative he is because Norman manages to make Peter believe that he is serving Spider-Man's best interests, when he's actually slowly skewing the relationship for Peter to work for his interests. And it isn't just Spider-Man. He manipulates Ross so he can get Otto's tech, and he uses his intern's work so he can create a wormhole and mine resources from space. This version of Norman is also the only character that benefits from the MCU's continuity, because it is his reaction to the universe's events that make up his motivation. Norman resents feeling small in comparison to the Avengers, so everything he does is to make him rise above them in terms of power. Octavius and Gargan, on the other hand, needed to have a presence from the beginning, especially with Octavius creating weapons for common criminals and Gargan leading a new dangerous gang. In Spectacular, when the writers wanted to build up a villain like Tombstone or the Master Planner, they would feature that villain from the beginning of the season to ensure they had a constant presence and give them a sense of foreboding mystery as to who they are. And the thing is, characters will talk about how dangerous Otto and Gargan are, but the threat doesn't feel real because they just appear halfway through the season. And Octavius and Spider-Man don't even get to fight. He gets sent to jail by Iron Man and is shelved for next season. And even though Scorpion is a physical threat, he becomes less intimidating the more he speaks because he sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon villain.
The streets were saying that the 1/10 was all talk. A bunch of nobodies led by the biggest nobody of all. Guess I'll just have to teach you some manners. Now, to finish what we started. Next time, I'll finish you for good! You lost your respect, your turf, and you're about to lose your life.
Until we meet again!
Since Spider-Man has been around for decades, I understand and respect the need to create a fresh take to stand out. But there needs to be some constants so the spirit is maintained. And Friendly Neighborhood has a lot of room for improvement in the next 2 seasons. Comment down below what you thought of your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Do you agree with me and think the series needs to improve itself? Or do you disagree and think the series is perfect and I'm just too demanding? And if you like what I do, subscribe if you haven't. It costs you nothing, but to me it means everything.